presenting our paper, Large Language Model-Based Code Completion is an Effective Genetic Improvement Mutation. This is a paper by Jingyuan Wang, myself, and Justyna Petke. It's not clicking anymore? Okay. I'd like to start off with introducing the background. So our paper intersects two topics: genetic improvement with large language models. Genetic improvement probably needs no introduction, especially after the keynote and the audience of this workshop, but generally it's an automated process that uses search-based techniques to enhance both the functional properties of software, such as fixing software bugs, and non-functional aspects as well, such as runtime or computational resource saving. And then we have large language models, which are neural networks that are trained on very huge amounts of text data, and they're used for tasks like text generation and question answering. The intersection of these two topics is not new. There's a paper by Brownlee et al., which has recently been published in the ICSE journal, that looks at this, and what they do there is they use the large language model as a mutation operator. So during the search, during genetic improvement, instead of just using the regular GI mutation operators, they prompted an LLM to replace the method with an improved version, and that was the way that they were creating the variants. Our work kind of builds upon this, but instead of using the replacement operator, we use the masking operator, which I will introduce next. The main takeaways from the previous work is that the genetic improvement mutations were able to generate more diverse patches in comparison with the LLMs. So we had a bigger search space. But with the large language models, these patches were higher quality, even though there were less unique valid patches, more of them compiled and passed tests. So we can see that each have kind of their strengths, and there's opportunity here in digging into this further to see how they can be combined. So our paper experiments with two new concepts building on the previous work. As I previously explained, the previous work used the replacement operator. So the LLM was prompted with replacing the entire method to generate variants that have a better runtime. What we do instead is we pass to the LLM the masked function. So instead of giving it the whole method and saying, okay, can you give me a better alternative? We take the method, we mask certain statements from it, and we ask the LLM to complete it. So this builds on the code completion powers of LLMs, which in previous work have been shown to have very good results in comparison with code generation. What we also look at is combining masking with traditional GI. So as I showed on the previous slide, there's strengths in LLM code completion, there's strengths in GI, which has been going on for decades. What happens when you combine them? How can we take advantage of the synergy between them to hopefully achieve better results? So before I move on any further, I want to show an example to kind of have a clear idea, a concrete idea of what this masking operator does. So the slide presents a buggy bubble sort function, and the bug is right here in the comparator, which should be flipped around. What we do is we mask this statement, and then now we can give it to the LLM and be like, we have this function, can you give me can you fill in the blank? And hopefully what we get is this operator flipped around. Now, this is obviously a functional bug. We are doing this for runtime in this paper. Briefly going over the research questions, we explored 4 questions. First, looking at the search space that is generated by the masking mutation in comparison with the replacement mutation from previous work, as well as with the classic GI edits. So we ask whether the search space created by this operator has more unique tests, more compiling tests, more test passing tests. We kind of compare and contrast. Then we ask whether the patches that are generated yield a better runtime improvement in comparison with other approaches. We also ask whether the runtime efficiency of employing this masking operator improves. So what is the model response time of prompting the LLM with code completion versus replacement in this instance? And then finally, what I've touched on previously is the combination of masking with GI. What does combining the two types of mutations entail in terms of results? And we do this basically with setting certain probabilities. For example, for 30% probability, we say 30% of the time prompt the LLM, the other 70% use traditional GI edits. And then we analyze the search space that's created, and we see whether this improves the results. Getting into the experimental setup, I will briefly go over this because there are many experiments and a lot of details that are in the paper, which maybe we don't need to get into. But the main things is we used the GIN framework, and we used this framework because it was used in the previous paper, so it allowed us to easily extend the implementation there. Also, to be able to directly compare with the results to see whether the masking operator performed better. And our benchmark consisted of 5 open source projects: JCodec, JUnit, JSON, CommonsNet, and Karate. And these projects, again, were used in previous work. We used them so that we can directly compare. And then we looked at 4 different LLMs: Gemma 22B, Gemma 29B, Llama 3.18B, and Mistral 7B. Llama and Gemma because they've been shown in previous work to have really good results. Mistral 7B because that was the best performing model in the previous work that I mentioned. So we wanted to rerun it to again allow for direct comparison. 2 search strategies were used: local and random search, and these ones are already implemented within GIN. An important thing to maybe note is that we ran a few mini experiments to be able to identify impactful statements to mask when using the operator. So there's a difference if we're masking a return statement, or we're masking an assertion, or we're masking different types of statements yield different results. So we kind of played around with this to see what would be the most impactful statements to combine with this operator. And finally, I had mentioned that we combined the LLM operator with the traditional GI mutations, and we did those with 3 probabilities: 30%, 50%, 70%. And that means we prompted the LLM 30%, 50%, or 70% of the time to use the masking operator, and the rest of the time we used GI mutations. Looking at the prompt that we used, it's important to note, basically in this paper, our focus was not prompt engineering at all. So this was not done super systematically. We reached this prompt through trial and error, basically by giving it the masked code, giving it clear instructions that it needs to fill in with a meaningful implementation, telling it what project it belongs to, and then finally giving it very clear formatting instructions to allow for automated extraction of the code during search. Now we followed best practices with this, but I think there's an opportunity here in future work to play around with the prompting bit of this combination of LLMs and GI. Oh, yes, question. We have a question, so we're getting the mic.
Just wonder, why do we need to provide the project name to the prompt?
So we were hoping to give it as much context as we could. We couldn't give it, the full project go, be like, this is missing, fill in the blanks. So what we did instead is we gave it the project name. We didn't want the prompt to be too long, but at the same time, we wanted to give it enough context. So that was kind of the middle ground that we laid on. And again, that was through kind of trial and error of trying with the project name, trying without, and it seemed to perform better with. Again, we really would hope to explore more in future work.
Project name that would be 2 words?
No, like for example, we had 5 projects. For example, you say this code belongs to the JSON project, or this belongs to the Karate project. So it allows to give a lot of context because LLMs are trained on these projects already, but with not adding in the full code of the project, which is, these are huge projects with many, many files. Yes, Americ?
I think it's better to provide the description of the repository instead of project name.
I think that's actually a very good idea and something to be explored in the future, to say like the project generally does this. Maybe also we could kind of give it through some sort of analysis, give it kind of the bottlenecks of where we think, you know, most of the runtime is being used up in terms of computational resources, and kind of try to direct it in certain directions. There's a lot of tuning that can be done, and that's what's so amazing about, you know, playing around with the prompts is that you can really play around with what you give it.
You already know the project from when already have seen the source code, so it might not really work.
Yeah.
Or,
Yes. Yes, that's another thing. The benchmarks that we have are very well known, mostly Apache projects that the LLM is most definitely already trained on. So it's kind of a cop out to use the context in that way. Again, opportunity for future work for sure. Okay. Let's get into the results. So the first thing that we ask is whether the search space that was created is more dense. And I will be presenting for most of the results of one project, because I did not want to crowd the slide with too many graphs, but all the graphs can be found in the paper, and I will give general takeaways from, you know, across the 5 projects for each research question. So presenting JUnit 4, we have the first row, the previous best results observed in the last paper, which were on the Mistral model using the replacement operator. And then the row under it, we reran those settings ourselves, and we present the results for what those were underneath. Then we have the statement edits. Those are the traditional GI edits that Jin implements. We have the 4 LLMs that we use with the masking operator. In pink, we have the number of valid patches. In gray, the number of compiled. In blue, the number of passed. And then you see blue dots on the bars. Those are the number of uniques. And what we see is that the GI process using LLMs with the masking mutation operator provided a much denser search space. And you can see that more when you look at the full picture of all the graphs together. But what we did see is that the number of unique valid patches was slightly fewer. So that kind of lines up with what we saw on that second slide, right? The background slide where I said the LLMs tend to generate less uniques but higher quality variants. Another thing to maybe pick on the slide, we can see that the first 2 rows we have different results from recreating the results of the last paper, but that's very expected because LLMs are not deterministic, they're black boxes. So while we did try to use the same version with the same prompts, the results are different, and we can see that they're quite different. So that's a threat to validity in our results that I can discuss a little bit later. You might get better or worse results when you repeat the experiments. And that's why repetitions in papers like this are very important to aggregate averages, because otherwise you can't make a clear takeaway from just one run. Okay, with the second research question, we then look at the patches that yield greater runtime improvements. We have the 4 models with the masking mutation, and then the traditional statement edits in the second row. The blue presents the maximum, and then the orange presents the median in terms of runtime, and the x-axis is in milliseconds, by the way. Yes, Bill? And we have the dashed lines that show the previous best median and the previous best max. The percentages that you see on the slide don't necessarily correspond with the length of the bar, and that's because we look at the ratio of the improvement in comparison with the original runtime. So you can see in percentage there what that improvement was. And what we found is that the masking mutation outperformed the LLM-based replacement mutation in 4 out of the 5 projects. And then looking at the number of patches that yielded greater runtime, that's presented in this table. And we can see that in the last row in bold, where I have that red arrow, Gemma 29B had the best results. But what's interesting is that the row just above it, Gemma 22B, which is a much smaller model that can easily be run locally on most machines, also had very good results. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're constrained on resources, smaller models are not out of the question, and a model like Gemma 22B performed pretty well. Looking at the runtime efficiency of the masking mutation, we present on this slide the average aggregated model response time across all the 5 projects. Again, first row we have replacement and then the 4 masking mutations. And you can very clearly see that the masking mutation, all the bars are shifted left, meaning they had a much lower response time in minutes than the replacement. So that's a very important takeaway, because it means that if you use the masking operator, you can get the LLM to give you a response quicker. And that also means that you can generate a lot more variance in the time budget that you give the search, meaning you can have possibly a bigger search space and possibly reach the solution that you need either quicker or within that time budget. And then finally, we look at combining masking with traditional GI. We have kind of a similar setup in terms of the graph. Pink is valid, gray is compiled, blue is passed. And we saw that while the masking mutation generated more valid patches than the combination generated more valid patches than just masking alone, the runtime improvements were pretty inconsistent when we looked across all the 5 projects. So we think that this is something that's worth experimenting with in the future. Either looking at tuning this better, looking at different probabilities. Also, I don't think the probabilities need to be set on certain values. It can be kind of played around with during search based on what's performing better. There's a lot to play around with there. And finally, just touching on some observations that we saw in terms of the responses that the LLM gave and some issues that we found. We can put them into 3 categories. One is, in a lot of the instances, incomplete code was returned. So it was only instructions or examples instead of something that can actually be executed. Second, sometimes the code was not in the expected format, which sounds like not a big deal, but it is when you have an automated search and you can't extract the code and then you have nothing to work with. So this happened in 20% of the cases where it deviated and it didn't allow for the automated extraction. Therefore, we didn't have a successful variant. And then finally, meaningful code that didn't actually improve. So whether that the code was returned unchanged, whether it was replaced with comments, or a lot of repetitions being produced by the LLM and kind of getting stuck on the same value. Threats to validity, the first one I touched on already, which is variability in results. So you have, black box models here, non-determinism. It's important to repeat the runs. And then the runtime improvement measurement in any study like this is not super accurate. We tried our best to mitigate this by running it all on one machine, but you can only be so accurate. And then finally, prompt engineering, which we already discussed briefly through your questions, something to possibly expand on in the future. And with that, that's my talk. Please, if you have any questions, I'd love to discuss. And the full paper with the full results can be found online. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you for the great presentation. I just wonder, it is the input is the bucket code?
Yeah, so we're not saying buggy because we're doing runtime improvement. We can say, the less optimized code. We give it, is this too loud? I feel like it's echoing a little bit. Yeah, we basically use the GI process as is. There's no difference in the search. All we play around with is the mutations that are activated during search to create the variance. So the input is a program, you have a fitness function, you have tests, and then what happens is instead of applying, deletion or replacement or insertion like you would with regular GI mutations, we instead have an LLM model that we prompt with the masking prompt to give us the program variant, if that makes sense. I think maybe I understand what the confusion is here in the prompt, I say that we only give the masked code. Yes,
Wait.
so maybe I can clarify. The input to the search process, what we give Jin is the full program. And then the search process happens and certain methods are selected. And what you can do is you can alter and mutate these mutations with regular GI edits, replacement, delete, insert, or you can use our mutation, which is the masked code. So you can alter that piece of the code using the LLM, if that makes sense. So the input to the masking prompt is the masked method, but to the full search process to Jin is the full program. Does that make sense? Okay, good.
Next question, Andrea.
Okay, so I have multiple questions, just one. So you are using LLMs to have a larger space, be able to generate things that typical replacement wouldn't be able to generate. So using LLM to synthesize new fragment of code. Did you look at how much more diverse it was on whether what generated through the LLM already appeared somewhere in the project you were targeting or not? Was it generating completely new code or something that you could have potentially discovered through more traditional issues?
You're talking about kind of qualitatively analyzing the patches and seeing, is this something that a traditional GI edit could not have produced in itself?
What the LLM producing something more cleverly as a shortcut, or was it processing something that was outside the search space of just?
I'll be fully honest that we didn't do a full. Oh, so the question was whether we checked the patches that were produced by the LLM with the masking operator to see if they generated something more clever than a traditional GI mutation would be able to. Did I repeat the question right?
Basically, are you considering making the same search space but with shortcut by LLM, which would be harder to find with just random sampling for GI, or was it adding something to the search space?
Yeah.
That GI would never been able to do?
Yeah, we're actually exploring this in a different paper. We're actually exploring this in a different paper to actually look at what the search space that can be generated by general GI mutations and what can be produced by LLMs, and comparing and contrasting. That's like a full other paper that we're doing. Within this work, we didn't do a very comprehensive qualitative study, to be honest. So I don't know if I can comment on that, especially because we only have 5 benchmarks. But yeah, something that we're working on in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. A very important question. It's like the next step. Oh yeah, let's see. So the question online is, have you considered comparing performance of different operators under a fixed runtime budget instead of fitness evaluation? So that's kind of what we did, if I understand the question correctly. Each of the runs that we have in our experiments were under a fixed time budget, and we let the search run up until that time budget ends, and then we compare the performance of the traditional GI edits, the masking operator, and the replacement operator, and we check. So it is the full runtime budget of the search, which includes the fitness evaluation. I hope I answered that correctly.